Welcome to Homeschool is a Work of Heart. I'm Melissa Webb, and after years in the classroom and years homeschooling and supporting those in home education, and even more years creating curriculum for families like yours, I have learned this. Homeschooling isn't about perfection. It is about purpose. And this podcast is here to encourage you, to guide you, and to remind you that what you're doing truly matters. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Welcome, everyone. You have landed successfully on Homeschool is a Work of Heart. This is a podcast I love recording for you each and every week. And if you love listening, would you please do me a big favor and rate and review this week's episode? I may go long this week, by the way. I am looking at my notes and it's a whole page longer than usual. So who knows? And you know I always go off tangent. So just enjoy. Before I forget, I also want to be sure to remind you to check out the show notes for this week. My next home educator training, which is happening next Wednesday, on a writing system that works, is for any home educator, but especially those who have children between grades 3 and 8. And I would love to meet you over there. So go check that out. All right, let's go. I was thinking this week about how some of the best parenting classes that I've ever seen have occurred in public spaces when kids are just being kids and parents are trying to regain the control they've lost. Have you seen this? In Target, at restaurants, and parking lots. Now, it's only funny if it's not happening to you, right? Have you heard any of these parent demands? Maybe you've delivered some yourself. I have. These are things like, you need to stop crying, or don't you talk back to me, or calm down right now. Or, of course, the stop being so dramatic. Now, in the heat of things, today's conversation would not land well for most of us. But if you are in an open-minded, calm space, I think you're going to walk away today with some excellent insights, some practical strategies, things that you can apply to the next parenting class you lead, whether or not you have other people watching you. So let's talk about it. I specifically want to talk about behavior management versus emotional regulation. Of course, the goal here is to help our kids manage their big emotions, but I believe we need to start with understanding the differences between managing behaviors and regulating our emotions. So there can be a time and place for both. That's just called real life. But leaning into intentionally teaching our children emotional regulation is going to minimize your need for behavior management in many cases. Not all, of course, but in many cases. Does that sound good? Today, I want to talk about this. Specifically, I'm going to dive deep into emotional regulation and what it is and what it is not, and why it matters. And perhaps most importantly, why we as parents have to begin with ourselves. We need to regulate our own emotions before we can effectively teach it to our children. I mean, most of us adults today were taught how to control our behaviors. Yes? Not how to regulate our emotions. Schools and parenting models have reflected this for decades. In fact, I remember as a brand new teacher, fresh out of college, in my very first classroom, I can picture it. It was a beautiful room, and I loved how I decorated it, and I proudly created one of those classroom behavior charts. It was based on some classic classroom management book that I read in college, but every student had a clothespin clip with their name on it. Can you picture this? And I put it on my behavior chart, and it was green on the bottom, yellow, and then red. And everyone started at the bottom on green, and the goal was to stay there all day. If you had to move your clothespin clip up into the yellow, and sometimes I did a whole rainbow, it was like orange to yellow. That was a warning. But if you got to red, it probably meant a phone call home or a note paperclip to your backpack or something. This was in the mid-90s, my friends. But you may have sat in a classroom like that. The focus, I was taught, was on managing my students' behavior, taking control of the classroom. I mean, I was taught how to give the teacher look, which I was never good at. I smile far too much. I am far too happy to ever be the mean teacher. That is just not in my genes. So this just was not a thing. I really struggled with some of this in the early days. Back in my school days, the goal was keeping my name off the board at the front of the room. Did you ever have that, teacher? Go put your name on the board. That was never good. For my parents' generation, my dad specifically, the goal was not getting the ruler across his knuckles from a Catholic nun who was standing over him. We have been trying to control children's behaviors for a very long time. And listen, I am not criticizing every teacher, every parent, or any nun from those previous generations. I know, and you know, most people have always just been doing the best that they could do with the information they had at the time. I know that's what I was doing. But looking back now, I really can clearly see something important. I spent a whole lot of time trying to stop behaviors without considering, without understanding the emotions that were driving them. And that really matters because behavior is often just a physical form of communication. Do you want to hear that again? Behavior is often a physical form of communication. Why does a child slam a door? Frustration? They're trying to communicate that. Why do kids break down in tears? That's a behavior. What are they trying to communicate? Maybe they feel overwhelmed, confused. I mean, if we go back to infancy, think about how little humans communicate with us. It's not through words, it's through their behaviors. They cry. It's how they tell us something isn't right. They need something. So, defiance may sometimes actually be a way of trying to communicate some form of anxiety. Or withdrawing could be a form of shame or not understanding something. Anger can actually be hurt. And don't get me wrong, we are not here to excuse poor behavior. Nope. But we want to understand what's underneath these behaviors. That will help us respond more wisely instead of us doing the same thing and just reacting in a behavior. So there's a difference. Behavioral control focuses almost entirely on stopping some outward action. It sounds like, you stop that right now. You are embarrassing yourself, mister. Right? Whereas emotional regulation focuses on understanding what's happening internally so that healthier responses can eventually follow. Again, I am not saying that children should ever be allowed to scream or to hit or be disrespectful of others or run wild in public spaces. Nope. Sometimes a behavior will require us to also respond with a behavior. Sometimes it's a safety issue. Emotional regulation is not about permissiveness. I wouldn't even call it gentle parenting, which I did another podcast on a few months back. There's a misunderstanding with that. I'll see if I can find it and link it for you. But my point is, we're not pretending that poor behavior is ever acceptable. It's not. But if you were raised feeling discouraged to feel negative emotions altogether, this may be something that's really going to land for you this week. Because it is something we want to look at a little more closely. And this takes time and this takes practice. But a lot of people were told, do not cry. Big boys don't cry. Or, why are you so sensitive? Do not be sensitive. As if these negative emotions are somehow bad. They're not. They are not. But you may have had parents or relatives or teachers who simply ignored your negative emotions or gave you a very difficult time regarding your quote unquote negative emotions. That creates its own problems because it's not as simple as, hey, stop feeling that way, sad, angry, defiant, whatever you want to put in there. It might be nice if it were that easy, but it's not. The problem is that emotions do not disappear because we ignore them. They usually just come out sideways later. This is how we have anxious people or people with explosive anger or withdrawal, or how about people who become people pleasers? So if we were not taught how to sit with disappointment, sit with frustration, embarrassment, rejection, stress, we have likely found our own ways of dealing with those negative emotions. You want to know a few common ways? Overeating, avoidance, overdrinking, high levels of anxiety. So let's recognize these things in ourselves first, and then I want us to help our kids. You may need a journal today, There may be some thoughts or ideas today that you're going to want to jot down, and then you can delve deeper into it when you have some quiet time. I also encourage people to listen to a podcast that lands for you more than once, because you're only going to be able to hold so much of the information I'm sharing, and you're going to start thinking. So then you're not listening. When you're thinking, you're not hearing me. So if you ever need to stop, pause, go think in a quiet space, come back, listen later, or re-listen at another time. I just want to kind of throw that out there. I think that's important. I want to start by defining emotional regulation. We know what behavioral management is. Yes, it's managing behaviors. And so emotional regulation is really that simple too, and it's not. But in its simplest form, yes, emotional regulation is learning how to regulate our emotions. By definition, it says this: emotional regulation is the ability to recognize emotions, understand them, and respond intentionally instead of reacting impulsively. Okay? But notice, it doesn't say anything about avoiding emotions. We really can't avoid emotions. This is how our brain works. Something in your life happens, some situation, some circumstance, some factual thing happens. You then have a thought about it. Every thought creates a feeling. Whatever we feel determines our action. And the actions of every day of our life, that's creating the results of the life we are living. This is powerful. Would you like an example? Sometimes it helps, I think. I love examples. So if we're ever going to master emotional regulation, we have to understand this model, because this is where it all begins. So let me give you an example. Let's say your child takes money out of your wallet without asking. Now you're going to have a thought about that. Oh my goodness, my child stole from me. My child is a thief, right? Let's just say that's your thought. That may not be your thought, but for example purposes, let's just say that's your thought. Thoughts create our feelings. How are you going to feel if you think your child is a thief? Anger, shock, surprise. Pick one. I always say choose one emotion. We may have multiple emotions, but always work on one at a time. When you journal, when you think this through. If I pick anger, what action then is going to happen from that emotion? Right? Because our feelings create the actions. Likely I'm going to explode. And I'm going to say something to my child like, how dare you? Don't you ever go into my wallet without my permission. Okay, so now I've acted, and what result will come from that? Again, I'm just thinking about for myself. I'm not thinking about for my child right now. I'm thinking about for myself. I may end up hiding my wallet, being like, I can't even keep that out in the kitchen. I'm going to have to hide that in my closet. That is what's likely going to happen as a result, as if my child really is a thief. And I always find this very interesting because often our result line ties right back to our thought line. If I'm really thinking my child's a thief, my result with that in mind is going to probably reflect that. Just interesting to think about because our brains always want us to be right. So if we have a thought, our brain wants to say, yep, we're right. That's just what we do. And so now think about it. I'm all the things. I'm suspicious. I'm watching more closely. I'm assuming bad intent. I'm emotionally reacting before I'm even gathering information. But what if we paused and we practiced some emotional regulation? We don't just behave or react, we think. We recognize our thoughts. We respond with curiosity. I always love to pull curiosity. Let me get curious. All right, so think about this. Emotional regulation are the emotions of how am I feeling? It's that line, that feeling line. And why am I feeling that way? That ties back to the thinking line because our thoughts create our feelings. So let's go back to that thought. My child took money without permission. Okay, that's just a thought. Now, how we're going to feel about it depends on how we word that in our own brain. Is it true? Did my child take some money out of my wallet without permission? That is true. And I may not like it. I do need to address it. There still needs to be accountability, probably consequences, but I want you to notice how different these two thoughts are. My child is a thief versus my child made a poor decision. I wonder why. One labels the identity of my child as a thief. What kind of feelings will that create? The other one is like, my child made a poor decision and I wonder why. It gets curious. Do you hear the difference? Both of those thoughts are going to create very different feelings inside of me as a parent, where the first might create rage or panic or shame or fear. I feel like the other one actually brings up things like concern. The curiosity for sure, some firmness maybe a level of determination to do a better job of teaching about boundaries. Now that is going to change my action line, how I respond. So instead of exploding, if I'm emotionally regulating, I'm sitting down and I'm asking questions. Instead of labeling my child, we're addressing that action. Instead of assuming who they are or fearing who they are becoming, I'm going to focus on helping my child make better decisions and choices. And that is emotional regulation. I'm not jumping into, I need to change my child's behavior. I'm not. And I'm also not pretending the problem doesn't exist. I'm not removing consequences. I'm not just passive about it, ignoring it. No, it becomes a learning opportunity where I pause long enough to separate the circumstance of what happened from the story I'm starting to tell myself. And this matters tremendously in parenting because children often live up or live down to the labels repeatedly spoken over them. I hear parents say things like this all the time, and I just want to caution them. If you're somebody who's labeling her children, really be aware of it, especially if it's what's considered a negative trait, like, oh yeah, George, he's our lazy one, or don't mind Katrina, she's just the dramatic one in our family. We want to be careful. Those labels stick, and often not to the person to whom you are talking, but to the child who's hearing it, who's being labeled. And even positive labels can sometimes put a lot of pressure on our kids. I want to encourage us to embrace that emotions are not problems to solve. They are signals trying to get our attention. Feelings are never wrong, my friends. They are not good and they are not bad. Now, we do label feelings as that's a positive emotion, happiness, love, joy. Oh, that's a negative emotion, anger, rudeness, embarrassment. But that's just a way to categorize. We're not saying they are good feelings or they are bad feelings. We should embrace them all, experience all of them. We've been given them all. It's the only way that we're ever going to get the full human experience in this life we are living. We are supposed to experience them. So they're not bad or good. They're not right or wrong. They just are. And what we really want to do is discover what's creating them and to determine the action that follows them. Okay? What we do following any feeling, which is the action is the behavior, is what matters. Feeling to action. There is a pause, a very tiny little pause between how I feel and then what I do. It is such a tiny space right there. But that is where emotional regulation lives. It's why it takes practice to get better at this. And keep in mind, emotionally healthy people still get angry, they feel hurt, they cry, they get frustrated. Our goal is not becoming emotionless. I want to feel all the emotions. The goal is learning how to experience emotions without allowing them to completely take over our action line, our behavior. And that's what we want to teach to our children. It's not always easy because once we hit the action line, we can't go backward. The best we can do, really the only thing we can do, is create a new thought about where we are now that would produce a more desirable emotion so that we could have a better action, reaction, or behavior. So again, remember, we have a thought, that thought creates a feeling, the feeling creates an action, our actions create our results. We need to talk about this with our kids. So let's give some examples there, and then I'll wrap us up. But I want you to consider that sometimes our children are actually mirrors reflecting right back to us what's happening inside our own nervous systems. So this could be uncomfortable to admit for some of us, but it can also be incredibly empowering. So again, journal time. What emotions are you modeling regularly that you see mirrored back to you through your child's thoughts, their feelings, and their actions? Researchers often talk about something called co-regulation. And this is the idea that children learn their emotional regulation first through calm, connected relationships with emotionally stable adults. It's the best way for us to teach our kids is when we regulate our emotions merely by watching us, they are learning. So in other words, our children borrow our calm before they develop their own sense of calmness or peacefulness. So let's think about that for a moment. Imagine a child who's emotionally overwhelmed, starts yelling louder, yelling louder. You come in and you react. You start yelling louder, yelling louder. Does that create calm in anyone? No, instead we're now escalating. And escalation tends to create more escalation. Now, many adults are walking around dysregulated while trying to raise regulated children. That's really difficult. And that's why this conversation today matters so much to me. It's what I want to help you with. Emotional regulation skills can be learned at any age, and this is such good news because one of the most powerful things we can do as parents is first begin to notice our own emotional patterns without immediately shaming ourselves. That's so important. This is not about you shaming yourself for anything. And I hear it all the time. Let's not do that. Let's just build an awareness. I want to tell you some of the things I hear moms say, and then I want you to track some of your emotional patterns because awareness is always the beginning of growth. Some common things I have heard moms say, I don't know what happens. My chest just tightens when I feel disrespected. Does that happen to you? I just don't know. It's like my voice gets louder whenever I feel out of control. Does that resonate? How about I rush to fix emotions because discomfort makes me so uncomfortable? Or I just withdraw from everyone, from everything if I feel overwhelmed. Become aware of what you do. What are your emotional patterns? And then once you do that, you're going to see it's time to start teaching your kids as well. Opportunities are just going to lend themselves to you. So let's go back. Instead of this incident of the money being taken from your wallet turning into tears, let's say you had accused your child of stealing and now they are crying. Or maybe you did handle it very calmly. You got curious, you asked questions, and still they started crying. Let's just have the crying child, okay? It's a new circumstance. It's a new situation. Your child is crying. Without emotional regulation, you could very easily go to, oh my gosh, there's no need to cry about this. How will you feel? Impatient. What action will you take? You may say something like, would you just stop crying? Instead, what if we move toward more compassionate thoughts? Instead, your child's crying and you intentionally think, you know what? I really want to be more compassionate. What feeling will that produce? Definitely more patience. And then your action's going to be more likely words of encouragement, like, I can see you're upset. Let's figure out what's going on. First, we regulate to a feeling we know will be more helpful, something like patience, like love, like understanding, like compassion. And then our actions are going to turn into better words, things like, you know what, your body seems really overwhelmed right now, sweetheart. Let's just take a breath together. What a difference. Now, the boundary still exists. It's not okay to take things without asking. But you know what else exists? Emotional awareness. So let's go back to how I started this whole podcast about those moments of public parenting and child meltdowns. When the mom's yelling, calm down right now. You know, those are desperate attempts to regain control. That's with a focus on behavioral management. And yes, they still may happen from time to time, but they deserve our attention in those quieter moments we give ourselves when we can reflect on what we are proud of and what we still want to work on. Most of us were never taught emotional regulation ourselves, so we need to practice. And the good news is we can, and we can change. Our behaviors can change. These cycles can end today. We can learn this. Our children can learn this. And little by little, with one pause, one breath, one compassionate response at a time, our homes can begin to feel calmer too. And that, my friend, is what I want for you. Right on. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. And hey, if you are feeling stretched thin and you would love some support with teaching writing, I offer programs designed to make that part of homeschooling easier and more enjoyable for both you and your child. I also have free resources on my website, so please be sure to check those things out and subscribe to the podcast. You do not have to do this alone. Right on.